Hello and welcome back to another News from the Real World blog. And I'm Jeremy. I am a third-year technical direction grad.
I'm Allie. I'm a third-year SMPM grad.
And I'm Damien. I am a third-year costume design grad.
And so we just comment on several different articles that we think are either of importance or were essentially voted on by the populace. And starting off this week, we've got Allie.
Yeah, so this one is titled Why They Walked. Members of the cast of Peter and the Starcatcher at Citadel Theater Speak Out. This is on rescripted.org, and it's written by the cast of that show. So basically what happened, and this is theater in Illinois. So basically what happened is that they had a bunch of grievances, and they did not feel like they were being taken care of. And so after about 8 public performances, they all walked. And they wrote this letter. And it's an interesting read. So this is basically just their letter to the Chicago theater community about... And it's just an attempt by them to be like transparent and bring up these issues in a way that will help others. They do have a lot of really... key points about the grievances that happened. So like there were physical hazards on set that were never taken care of. It was unprofessionally handled. Like they had their PM at the time come in and talk to them, and apparently the way in which that was handled was just not helpful or beneficial. They mentioned sexism in that talk that he had with them, so it was really not a good situation. They have suggested pathways to rebuild trust. And so they're hoping
I like that the first one there is a qualified stage manager.
I have many thoughts about this.
Do share.
So like their hope is that this can make the community better, and it sounds like from even the comments on this letter, this is not a unique experience for this cast at Citadel, which is unfortunate, but it also sounds like they have a new PM, like they're trying to maybe take steps to make stuff better. Maybe it's because the spotlight was shown on them, but, you know.
It is nice to see at the very least the sexual harassment complaint is fairly low on the list, meaning that it wasn't that reason.
Yeah,
it was a concern, but it wasn't like the overarching...
It was an interesting thing that they threw in there, though, because they didn't actually say what happened to...
Inside that, yeah.
Right, maybe it was just the comments that he said during the meeting itself, but like the whole sexual harassment thing, I was a little thrown by because it didn't seem like those were the key issues.
I mean, I feel like their biggest concern was definitely there were 2 concussions and how the theater handled. I mean, I feel like that definitely needs to be taken very seriously.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious because I know that you mentioned...
So their first suggested pathway to rebuilding trust was a qualified stage manager, which... Yeah, and like there are bad stage managers out there, and like that's completely legit. But one thing they do bring up, and something that was brought up by someone who commented on it later on, who is an AEA stage manager, they brought up sharing performance reports with actors, like having performance reports be sent to actors, which it's just it's not done. Like, we don't do that.
Yeah.
And like, yes, you should follow up, and like obviously you should do the best job that you can in that circumstance, but like that's not an industry standard, and I don't know any theater that's done that. And I will say, I don't know obviously who the stage manager is or was or whatever, but sometimes it's not that simple to get the story. Like, if you were not there to witness it, you have 2 different actors telling you something, you have a run crew member telling you something, you have your ASN, and you're like, so this is what happened? And they're like, yeah. And you're like, oh, okay. So it's not always
And there's also
straightforward.
things that they're, like, asking for that I'm like, well, that's not really their job. Of, like, a stage manager of authority to demand, like, yes, they should have authority to demand, but then to, in a reasonable amount of time, or navigate alternatives until adjustments are made. I'm like, there should be someone there that has that eye for safety before they are even entering the room.
Yeah, it's almost like you can't deem someone as unqualified because of one mistake, and it's a mistake that was generated because the nature of that task is essentially hearsay. Like, you're basing it entirely on what somebody is telling you.
Unless you are
It's not
seeing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that is a bit of a stretch. That being said, I do see, to me, the one that stuck out is just the handling of the injury. You know, if you literally had 2 concussions happen during your rehearsals or during
Especially
your
if it was like on the
production,
same thing.
on the same set, there is a disregard for safety there.
Yeah.
I mean, power to them. I hope that the Citadel, if anything, I just hope this is a wake-up call for the theater, you know, to kind of get their shit together and be able to actually provide a space that is safe for their performers, but also even just for like the crew members, because I think about that as well. You know, this is such a focus on the cast, but thinking about the people that are also running things behind the scenes, how their lives could potentially be in danger as well. So
yeah, it was like you said. I hope it goes well. I hope it does.
Hope things
make
change, or you know.
So.
And I think this is definitely going to have to be a top-down change there, because if it's that bad, you can't. There's no way for them to fight upwards.
Right, like the whole a designated advocate for actors and respectful. That's an equity. Oh my God, why can't I think of the word? It literally just escaped my brain. That's your who you elect.
the board,
Your representative.
No, your,
your.
what's the name of it? Why
Equity
did I just? Oh my God, my brain just died. Nope, gone. It's the cast member who's voted as like the equity rep. Yeah. Oh, that's gonna bother me. To like, and that's like a top-down thing. That's like a theater thing. If you are employing equity people, your stage manager counts there too. Like,
I'm sending this tip afterwards.
you should you should have that representative. Oh, that's gonna bother me. Okay, so next article while I look up that term.
All right. So, looking at other production messes, The Vice has an article by Kyle Raymond Patrick titled "Behind Every Film Production is a Mess of Environmental Wreckage," and this talks about how essentially BBC did a study, and there are several other studies out there that found out that like a single hour of TV produced generates 13 metric tons of carbon dioxide. And if you're talking, then there's a 2006 UCLA study that found that for the California film and television industry created 8.4 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. And yeah, that's a lot of waste. And this is going from the impact of day-to-day operations of people, actually like just dumping waste, and also like transporting, and the people. It's also counted like, it's weird because it's also kind of like the people's commute to their job, which for everything else people don't count as part of that industry. So it's a lot of finger pointing in some ways, but also like, hey, yeah, we need to be more conscious when we're saving things and being thinking about our carbon footprint. And it brought up midway through or early on in the article, because this is a very long article, there was talk about Luan, scary, and it's being talked about by someone who doesn't really know Luan, I think, by reading it, because it's saying, Luan is often harvested from rainforests. Yes, that was true 20 years ago. Not so anymore. It's completely different material. Not always farmed lumber, but tends to be more so nowadays. So it's getting better. And they're like, well, just the old pesky union carpenters or carpentry unions don't want to use our new stuff because they want to continue using wood. I'm like, that's not true. Like, true, yes, they want to continue using what they have, and the lumber industry has gotten better about what it is, which is fairly helpful. But it goes into a lot of detail about trying to hire different consultants and green production guides that are designed to help everyone be more green, to the point where they're like, yeah, you need to have someone standing there at the trash can as people are coming off their break, making sure they're putting it into the right bin.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yes, but 9 times out of 10, if your local recycling place isn't actually handling your recycling, they're mixing it back in with the trash.
Also, like you said, like, are you then taking into account that person has to drive in to do that job? So now
you've added more.
You know,
but yeah, it's just.
I think it's a good.
I think there are things that we can do, and like it
Yeah.
talks about, making sure that leftover catering food gets delivered to homeless shelters,
Mm-hmm.
and if there's anything scenery that can be reused, doing that, or being more mindful of spaces and.
Or like biodegradable, so like they talk about like replacing water bottles with refillable water tanks, like just stuff that's
the little things
that you can do.
But like,
I mean, I will say, like, even working in theater, like, we're definitely not a no waste industry.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the most important thing that I've found, again, it's like the previous article, is just a wake up call to kind of, just general film studios and how they can make small changes. They mention. And it's things that I never even really considered, but just like the impact that encouraging in-state filming, how that is actually super beneficial because you're not having to fly people anywhere, how you're not having to create pollutants due to transportation, but also just even something small like changing the water bottles on set to make sure that you're using refillable. But like, I guess the biggest thing is like it's still not enough.
Yeah.
Like it's still like, even though, and it's talking about how like the studios themselves, like on-site studios, are making an effort to reduce waste and to make changes. But at the end of the day, what's causing a lot of this is like on set across the country or even around the world. So it's just like bringing to light that it needs to be more than just these small changes. I think some of the things that I never even considered, I think it was like towards the beginning of the article where they were talking about some of the things that films have done in the past, that it's funny that I didn't hear about these. And just like reading, the fact that when they filmed Mad Max that they damaged areas of the Atlantic African coast, and like I feel like if anything this is kind of bringing accountability to future productions, that like, hey, we are taking notice. Like bringing bison to an island in California where they're not native and then leaving them there, like that's pretty messed up. But it's just, get your shit together, Hollywood.
I have a really weird like hippy dippy question.
Oh God.
No, like I honestly wonder with the rapidly deteriorating state of our planet, if there's gonna be in the future like a way to like clean it up, or at least try to clean it up, and that if you have a large production, it's going to be someone's job to assess how much waste you created, and that will be part of your budget. Like I actually wonder.
And that's kind of what they're saying, is that there needs to be someone who's focused on the greening of their productions.
Right.
So hiring someone that is focused basically on how do you get rid of the waste.
No, but I mean like.
And how you deal with it. And how you clean it up. Yeah.
Right, but like, I feel like money is the thing that Hollywood listens to. And if it's you pay more the more you waste, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Well, it's definitely, I mean, because money is the way that Hollywood listens, because like that's why they were saying that like a way to encourage it is to offer tax credits to companies that film in state, because it's like, oh well, you get this tax break if you decide to film here instead of traveling. It's like that in itself is saving you money, but also saving the environment. So.
Well, speaking of plants and things,
that was flawless.
This next article is on the DC theater scene. It is by Danielle. I'm gonna butcher her last name. Ignacio? Great. I just cannot read today. I apologize to everyone. And it's titled "How Matthew McGee, Little Shop of Horrors, Little Shop Puppet Master, Created New, More Terrifying Audrey IIs." Words are hard today. I apologize. So, I mean, this is really great especially for anyone that loves puppetry. Very cool mechanization that he was able to employ of, not having your hand have to be totally inside of things in order to make them work. And it's just gave it a new life and a new look that I've I've always thought of, that looks like just a giant puppet. But this has brought it to more life and add more animatronics to it, essentially, to give it that feel. So if you like puppets, give it a good read. But yeah, it's good on his process and gives us some detail of what it was.
I think they're just becoming so technological and detailed, and it's really astounding how advanced puppetry is.
It's also, this one puppet has been done for how many years?
Right.
Its specific requirements are known, and it's not like, for some reason I don't compare it to your Milky White in the production.
Well, I was gonna say
where it's gonna be
that's been done, and
that's
we
been
still
done,
don't have a good
but
one.
we still don't have a good one. We don't have the go-to default because it is so
problematic.
It's problematic. It's also very dependent upon the design aesthetic of the show.
That's true.
With the Audrey puppet, it's very much, this is what people know as Audrey. This is what it needs to look like. All of the artwork and everything that is associated with the show, when you get the show, it pretty much defines what it has to be and what it has to be able to do.
Right.
So, yeah.
Everybody loves puppets.
Right? Everyone loves puppets.
Except for creepy puppets.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yikes, that didn't give me a good segue for
No.
creepy interns. I don't know what to do.
I'll just take it away.
Take it away.
We'll just save the trouble there. So the article is Everything to Know About Internships in the New York Theater Community by Lene Medeiros. This is just a very educational article / list of interviews that they conducted with multiple companies, not necessarily just production companies, but anything from HR to just event planning for venues for Feinstein's 54 Below. So it's just a series of interviews that kind of give you information regarding what is necessary for someone to have a successful internship, or to even be hired on as an intern. It's very informative. I think that it brings up a lot of very good points, like the importance of a cover letter, which I can speak from personal experience. I've been told that one of the reasons I got an internship was because of my cover letter, that it was intriguing enough for them to actually consider me. But yeah, so this is specifically referring to internships in the city, but I feel like one of the things that generally for any sort of industry professional who is looking to make a break is to remember that the city is not the end-all be-all for internships, that there are internships in other parts of the country that could potentially be more beneficial than necessarily doing it in New York. But I think one thing that was refreshing for me is seeing that these internships pay. Some of them do. There was one, I can't remember which company, but they were like, oh, we give college credit and we have dope snacks. Let me tell you, those dope snacks are not going to pay rent.
Nope.
But yeah, so it's just, it's a good overview of a couple of different ones, and it's also kind of a reminder for anyone that there are multiple outlets to work in theater that don't necessarily require creative thinking. Yeah, so that's really it. It's a good. She asked the same question, or they asked the same questions for every company, and yeah, that's all there is to say.
No, I mean, I think it was good. A good generic overview, like you said. I think it's really important to never undervalue yourself enough to. I mean, if you've had any training whatsoever, if you've done something before, you're skilled labor.
Yeah.
Don't undervalue yourself and sell yourself short.
It's important to learn how to sell yourself, how to market yourself, and how to, become your own company. It's at the end of the day, at least for me, freelancing is what's going to be the ultimate goal. It's I have to be able to sell myself and to sell your product.
And that starts early at that internship stage too. It's for sure, for what you value yourself at.
Yeah.
100%.
Don't sell yourself.
Speaking of marketing yourself,
or paid,
right?
No.
No. What?
Me.
What?
It's
Oh,
you.
This.
No, it goes so well. You talked about skilled labor.
Great. We'll go with you.
Because that's next.
Great.
That's after.
I'm crazy.
So talking about.
I don't know what just happened.
Talking about not undervaluing yourself and having it be when it comes to skilled labor. So Pay Up Hollywood on Variety is talking about how unionizing has impacted impacted assistants' fight for better pay. So, sorry, you said the person's name. I was like, I don't know what you're saying. By Lane Lowe on Variety. Yep. And so basically, they just unionized with IATSE 871. Yeah. Local 871. And the really good thing is that their healthcare costs shrunk dramatically, almost
getting it on that group plan
instantaneously, right? Which is awesome. The bad thing is that the studios retaliated, and they have a 60-hour contract for hours in a week, and they don't obviously want that. Like, the workers don't want that. That's the only way that they can make a living wage. And so they unionized and they got better health care, but the studios cut back their hours. And only I think only Sony agreed to not cut the pay per hour, but they still cut their hours, which is like. So, this is a really good article. There's been a couple articles about Pay Up Hollywood, but this one goes into detail about like the people and how they're struggling and like what steps they went through to try and unionize in the first place, and how it's been both a benefit and like a blessing in disguise, but also like something really kind of bad in some ways. And they talk about how like it's just not fair because when they were trying to unionize, WGA West even said that like, oh, that doesn't count basically, like. And it's really kind of awful. I hope that it gets better from here, but it's not looking good right now.
Yeah, because I mean, it's basically a waiting game. Who's going to wait out who first?
Exactly.
And people with the money aren't hurting.
Well, and that's the thing is that, like, on one side, I understand
until
that
they run out of stuff.
The people are the most expensive thing about any project, but at the same time, one of the guys was like, paying me $16.63 an hour, like, is not going to break their bank.
Yeah.
When they have like $20 million budget, like, come on.
Right.
So, and they do so much, and like, no, you shouldn't have to work 60 hours. You shouldn't have to be killing yourself to work 60 hours a week, not because you want to, but because you
have to do that in order to afford to live.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
So.
Fight on, assistants, fight on.
Right.
It's like, just, yeah.
And like he said, like, these aren't minimum wage jobs. Like, they're skilled jobs. You can't just walk in off the street for this. And the fact that they're getting paid.
That sentence hurts me right there. Is, she said she received an increase of 30 cents per hour. Okay.
I think
it's gonna.
Across the board,
what?
I feel like any sort of, bottom of the totem pole positions, and not that this one is that, but just across the board, there does need to be a restructuring of the financial trickle down, because I feel like we're going to start losing a lot of very important voices in terms of like, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds and like, that sort of thing. It's like, these people need to be able to live. And I think it's an important push that's happening because for so many younger people, like, I mean, even for me, like as a designer, the thought of like trying, we graduate and all of a sudden trying to be back at the bottom and trying to find a way to live is intimidating. So I can't imagine like finally making it to this point and still struggling.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
It's gross.
It is. And it kind of goes back to...
It is.
We've talked about this in the past, like, doing this, like, doing art and theater and TV and stuff, it's like, yeah, if you're privileged, like, if you can make it work and you have people who can support you, because, like, otherwise...
Right. It is icky, if you will.
It is icky.
Did that just for you.
You teed that one up too good. So, the next article is The Ickiness of Marketing Your Art by Excellent Magazine by Rachel Porter. And this is starts off talking about people trying to market and explain their show without it being a fully realized thing yet. and how that is hard. And there are several myths that she says that are important to essentially get over, and that the fact that art is sacred, artists are selfishly devoted to art, money and commerce devalue art, artistic quality can only exist if it is independent of cost and demand, and artists have to suffer. And saying that, they're myths, they're not facts, but they do affect how people perceive and interpret these things, and process art. And it's just, talking about how to market yourself, how to value yourself internally enough that you can detach yourself from your art when having the conversation about your work.
Which is so hard.
Which is hard. But you have to be able to open yourself up to talking about things in a way that someone is still learning how to understand and process what it is, and then not be judging them for not getting your art. Right. You have to be able to have that full conversation. Otherwise, they'll feel misled, or once they truly think they get it, they'll either not get it at all and think they do, or they'll feel deceived along the way.
Right. It all just goes back to learning how to sell yourself and your art without ruining.
Correct.
the future.
In a world where you need money,
Yeah.
you need to, pay, eat, and everything else like that.
A lot of like the similar ideals from the internship article,
Yeah.
just in terms of how to properly approach it. Which is not easy.
Yeah. So that was an interesting read. Like, to me, there wasn't as much weight as I thought there was going to be in it. Because it was mostly just talking about their experience with this show that they're trying to get on, of Little Women by Figs and Wigs.
Yeah.
And they ended it with a marketing plug of buy a ticket to their show. Yeah. And see you at the merch stand. Okay. But
Priorities.
Priorities.
I mean, I don't know if they have those orange wigs for sale.
I mean, you look great.
I mean,
Expect it for the next time we film.
unless,
Nothing less. I will be very disappointed.
unless you're terrified of orange, then
Orange doesn't really look good on me, but
don't go.
right.
Orange doesn't look good on a lot of people, I think.
It looks good on me.
Fabulous.
Yeah. I don't have a good segue
We don't have
for
There's
this
no
one.
segue for this.
Things that make you uncomfortable? I don't know. Like orange?
Like
Or-
the segue. Let's
This segue. Uncomfortable enough. Speaking of those.
This is Setting the Story Straight on Trigger Warnings by Kaya Stanley Money.
Money.
On exitmagazine.com.
Sorry.
So this is talking about CPT, which is hosting a new Handle with Care festival, which they're very upfront about how they're still like figuring it out. It's a 3-week performance festival exploring the hotly contested concept of the so-called snowflake generation and all that comes with it. And so they asked theaters like what they're seeing audiences are asking trigger warnings for, and they found that a lot of there's a divide between people who do want trigger warnings for certain things and people who don't want anything to be spoiled for them.
Something like this came up last year too. I think I remember.
There's a lot in here. They do go through a lot of who they are and everything. It takes a little bit to get to what they're saying, and how they stand on the issue. But they do talk about. Damien, you brought up something really good about
content
this.
to consider versus a trigger warning.
Yes, which actually is kind of what we do here. It's more of but it's not for audiences, which is the interesting thing. So we do an evaluation of the entire season beforehand, and we go through what could potentially be a trigger warning.
Right.
And what I would like to do and what I've been asking for this next season is publish it.
Right.
Just make it available. Send it out to the whole school. This is what is in each show type of thing, so people
One of the things that I loved that they're doing is, in addition of this content to consider, is how like you as an audience member have the option to read further about the said content. Like you can go to their, I think you can either go to their website, but you can get a more in detail synopsis.
When you,
what is
when
gonna
you
happen.
choose to go into deeper.
Right. Like, and you choose whether or not you want to do that. And I think that's great. I mean, I think that that's a great step so that, because not just like what the content is, but also how it's going to get portrayed. Because, you know, like with direction, it's like how you interpret it or how you portray it on stage is going to be totally dependent of the process and who you're working with. So it's like, even though we might hear that there is a, you know, sexual assault, it's like, how is it handled? Do we actually see it? So the fact that they're giving you the opportunity to know how it's being handled on stage ahead of time is great. And that's something that I feel like theaters across the country could start doing. I feel like that's so doable. If it's in a place where you can elect to go see, it's not going to ruin it for anybody.
And I think it, to me, the most sense would be when you're purchasing the ticket, right? Like before you purchase the ticket. And so that would have to be both an in-person and an online thing that you could opt into. It's like, okay, so just so you know, for the show, would you like to see our content to consider?
Well, right. Also, like, it's a question of some of that, you know, how they're dealing with it, how it's being directed around, stuff like that. That's not always decided when you're buying tickets.
True, but that
So
it's a
timeline thing there.
Yeah.
Of
There
like,
have to be a follow-up of some sort. Yeah. But then you've already bought the ticket.
correct. You're already committed.
Well, you'd have to allow refunds. This is getting very involved.
I mean, just address it as you're buying the tickets, you know?
Yeah.
Like
I mean, ostensibly you would know at least like you'd have the script. Whether or not the director
Yes.
chose to do it off stage or like whatever, you'd have at least the content that would be being discussed, or you know what I mean? Like you'd have that generalization.
Yeah,
Are we
but
talking
the-
about the audiences, or are we
Sorry.
having the script?
No.
Or
No.
sorry, I lost track.
No, so like Jeremy's point of like when you're purchasing the tickets, you don't always have the exact vision of the director at that point, because you could
Right.
be purchasing tickets like 3 months in advance, or if it's part of the
Oh, I
season
see, I see.
package, you know, whatever.
Right.
So I get that point, but
But I mean, at that point, your director can say, "Oh, well, I'm feeling this in this show,"
Yeah.
or I really need, like, I don't see him with a knife, or I don't see, you know, this being this
Right.
thing. I see, you know, we need to have guns, and or
But
like
at least
your
you'd have-
designer going, you know, there needs to be a big this on stage.
I feel like at that point, though, it becomes a ticketing / box office issue, and or like a
yeah, well,
theater.
and that's,
like
that's
a-
the thing is like
a
how do you
business thing.
handle that though?
I mean, I feel like at that point you could very easily turn it into, say you buy a season, and this is just speaking from my experience of working in a box office, but if you get a season package and there is a show that you are not comfortable seeing, that you don't want to see, then the theater can offer you a voucher or a credit so that you can trade your tickets into another one of the shows. And I feel like that's totally viable, because then you can bring people with you, or you know, like you don't lose the
It's
amount
just
you paid.
figuring out the timeline of which you can include that information and also give them time to process that information
Right.
before they have to enact upon it.
And I feel like it needs to be a good balance between, you know, what's the word? The responsibility of the theater or the house, but also the responsibility of the patron. Because I feel like that's, you know, something that always happens where it's like, oh, well, I didn't know. And it's like, well, the information was available for you.
Yeah.
Did you put
You
it
had
like-
the ability to know.
Right, you had the ability to know. We made our effort, and so it's like I think a lot of in order for this to be effective, in order for this to be a change, is that there has to be you know, accountability on both ends, not just the theaters or the production companies, but also the patrons.
Yeah.
But I think the way that in which they handled it was that they're trying to, you know, handle it is something that hopefully will spread across multiple theaters.
Yeah, I hope so.
So, since we were talking about theaters and seasons, it is that time of year. That was my attempt, and it was terrible, I know.
You had a really good one earlier, though, so you know what?
I did. Redemption. So, it is, as we approach the holiday season, a lot of, you know, theaters and ballet companies start preparing for for their holiday shows, and a lot of the times that includes productions of A Christmas Carol, but in the ballet world it's time for the Nutcracker.
On the 21st.
So this article specifically, though, that was featured in Dance Magazine by Phil Chan and Georgina Paskogan.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah, we'll go.
focusing specifically on productions of the Nutcracker and how we can approach them responsibly in terms of addressing yellowface. So, if you're not familiar, in George Balanchine's The Nutcracker, there is a moment where there is this dance piece that features Chinese characters. Over the course of time, through the popularity of this production, this specific number has become a very has become a moment where an irresponsible company can feature yellowface, and how there is a push to kind of but just to completely eliminate this, because it has, it is offensive. Let me see. The New York City Ballet's Master-in-Chief, Peter Martins, has actually reached out to these people to kind of create a pledge. They found what's called the Final Bow for Yellowface Pledge that states, "I love ballet as an art form and acknowledge that to achieve diversity among artists, audiences, donors, students, volunteers, and staff, I am committed to eliminating outdated and offensive stereotypes of Asians," or in parentheses, yellowface, on our stages. This article goes a lot more in detail into how different departments or different areas can actually help bring forward this change. The first one they mention is just specifically when it comes into makeup and your casting, and just how when you do makeup, don't do stereotypical, like, you don't need a Fu Manchu, you don't need to create elongated faces, you don't need to make someone more yellow for the sake of making them look more Asian. And as a matter of fact, it goes further to say that directors shouldn't feel pressure to actually cast Asian dancers in the Chinese movement. Like, as an audience member, when you hear the music, you will know that it is a Chinese moment. So you don't
only
need
like
to
45-second long,
right.
ballet too.
You don't need to make your characters look quote unquote more Asian. And goes further into talking about choreography. I guess, like, I was not familiar with this, but there is this impression with, I guess, index fingers being pointed as being.
I didn't know that either.
I had never heard of this, but apparently it is a thing where that's being done, and there's a couple of theories as to where this gesture generated from, but it's essentially just people dancing with extended index fingers, and how, like, through the choreography, that's not necessary. You don't have to do any sort of, like, exaggerated head bobbing, any sort of, like, bowing gestures, and then the fingers. It's like, again, we know it's a Chinese moment. Just let it happen. And then, lastly, it talks about costumes and how you can pay tribute to Chinese culture without necessarily turning it into the caricature that it can become. It's just crazy to think that this sort of thing is still happening. I think across the board, yellowface and redface to me are the ones that still prominently happen. I feel like because it's so often in the media, especially when celebrities do blackface, that kind of becomes a central focus, but we tend to kind of forget that yellowface is a thing that happens also. So it's a great thing for it to be brought back to life and to make it a comment, or to make it a part of the discussion. And I think it's great that it not only do they address it, but they also provide alternatives of things that you can do to avoid it. And a lot of it falls on the work of the designers and the directors. And I think that that's super important, especially costume designers, because you're the ones, creating these characters visually. So, yeah, overall, great article. It's a good read. It's a pretty easy read. And it kind of makes you think a lot more before you approach a production of the Nutcracker, or just any sort of production that could call for racially stereotyped characters. There's also some great pictures of past productions that, for us now are incredibly cringeworthy, but are definitely help kind of bring to light the issue that's going on.
And it's honestly, it's interesting because looking at the Nutcracker holistically, in the second act, which is when all this takes place, is there are all of these different countries that are represented doing a parade and each doing a dance for Claire and the Nutcracker. And there's the Russian stereotypical dance.
Right.
There's Mother Ginger, who is usually a cross-dressed man, and there's Marzipan, which represents some other countries, and like they all represent a certain sweet delicacy, and they all represent also another country as well.
Yeah.
So there's it's intended to be this great parade of all these different countries and fully representative and inclusive. But the way that it has been shifted in stereotype, it's obviously wrong. But it's interesting that they don't mention any of the other things in this article, that they only focused in on that one.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the other cultures that we mentioned aren't necessarily, they're all Eurocentric appearances. And so like a lot of the times, you can't really, a person can't really, like a white person can't do whiteface to, represent
like a Russian.
Yeah. Right. Like, and so I think that that's why there's a specific focus on this one, because you are not only, there are physical appearances that identify as Asian, traits, and it's like when you're going that far, that's where it crosses the line. Because I feel like impersonating a dance, sure, but like to make someone's physical appearance into a caricature of a culture, that's where we start getting.
Well, and that's
issues.
the thing, like you said, like it's an opportunity to be inclusive, but like if you're turning it into a caricature, you're not making it inclusive.
Yeah, for sure.
Do better.
Well, speaking of what things look like, there's this article on the HowlRound called "What Our New Plays Really Look Like." Statistical guide to the U.S. world premieres in the 2019-2020 season. This is by Marshall Bovnick. Bovnick. Like I said, I'm horrible today. I apologize, everyone. And this is basically in order to capture the trends of different Lord theaters and larger theaters that are producing new works that are premiering. And the study that he did was mostly looking at how things are on the page, not necessarily how they are produced. So if the director has chosen to make changes from what the playwright specifies, those are not counted. It's only what the playwright has specified. And this is to get at the core issues of gender representation, race representation, who's getting these plays produced, and the overall like climate of what the new works that are being put out there are. And it's very in depth. A lot of data, and like several key highlights. Which, the first most troubling is the almost total absence of trans and non-binary voices in the season.
That's talking specifically about the playwrights, right?
That's talking specifically about what is called for in scripts. Does your script call for someone to be playing a character that is trans or non-binary?
I think that one. No, it's about the playwrights. It's about like if the playwright themselves are.
Oh yes, sorry. If the playwrights are that, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It is because I feel like we had this type of article last year, maybe. It's nice to see because then the male numbers were higher than the female numbers for playwrights, and it's nice to see that that's switched. But like, transgender, the playwright breakdown by race is still abysmal. Like, so.
I do wonder though, like when they start talking about the playwrights and. Are you asking playwrights to out themselves as transgender when you start? You know what I mean? Like if a person
is fully
has
transitioned
into being a woman, like what they can like I don't.
If they identify themselves as
exactly,
women,
why
how
would
do you
they?
know?
Why exactly? Like so that I do question that a little bit because it's like they're not by no means required to identify themselves as a transgender person. So why is that? Like how can we truly identify? And it's like it's not our place or like it's so I'm a little. If this either way, if this is the case, like again, it's kind of sad, but hopefully this will raise awareness. Sorry.
No.
No, and it goes on, talks about, them being MFA or not having an MFA, how that affects, which it doesn't really, it's slight advantage to people who have MFAs, but overall. And then, general cast size, it goes into a lot of details about a lot of things. And there were...
The cast by race is interesting. Like the characters.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Does this play have any indigenous characters? Written in the script as indigenous? And 7.2% said yes. That's... Sorry.
No, that's okay.
It's just...
yeah.
And then...
There's not much.
There are several things about... that I was surprised about with diversity in a lot of these shows is there's a good breakdown of, does the play have African American characters? That's right around 50%, but then it very quickly tapers off.
Yeah.
Of, Latinx, Asian, American, Middle Eastern, Arab, or indigenous characters, dwindling ever quickly.
Yeah. That's a huge gap.
Yeah.
And
it gets even worse for the transgender or non-conforming.
But then you look to later on the issues that are being covered most importantly in
this was fascinating to me.
The largest issue, 36.5%, is race in America.
Right.
And with your overall cast breakdowns being the aforementioned, the fact that is the largest percentage. And there's a lot of categories, to be fair. There's American or international politics, Me Too, mental illness, faith, economy, science, physical, LGBTQ issues, but then it very rapidly trails off there.
Yeah. I was interested to see that with everything that I'm sure that in a year or two we're going to start seeing more, but the fact that we were seeing little productions on the environment, and that's
that too.
It's pretty fascinating to the fact that based on his study that there's 0%
nothing new slated for
about the environment or gentrification or criminal justice. But my question is though, how are we delineating? Because I feel like a lot of the issues that are addressed in Race in America also kind of tie in with criminal justice.
I was thinking that too. Yeah. Sorry,
so I'm wondering how that was decided.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because with Black Lives Matter, it's which are we addressing both issues? Does it not count as both? Right. But yeah.
And he summed the article up by saying this is all to observe trends and wants to observe this over several years. This is the first big exhaustive review of this that has been done. And this person's a dramaturg, and they're they've been. I think they've been inspired by doing this year, and I think this is going to be a continuing thing. Yeah. But it's a really great read, and I advise everyone to go read it.
It's really it's really eye opening and just kind of makes you think about also what we're going to be studying, or what these are things that we're going to be working
doing
on. Exactly.
Right.
So hopefully this will get some playwrights excited about new topics or things that they've never really considered.
So, just to kind of close off this episode, theater's a good thing. So
it helps. Confront issues.
It does good things. We promise. Study finds live theater enhances student learning and empathy on PurdueExponent.org by James Passiar. Yep. I actually really love this article because I felt like there was an article last week about the teacher from California, I think, who got a Tony for basically saying exactly this. And I am glad for her, but the article said nothing about empathy and theater, basically, and it talked about how cool the Tonys was. So this went into depth about the studies that these teachers and managers of education did, and what they saw from it, which was so cool. So they talk obviously about how it's just in general really great to help students learn. If it's a play about something historical, it helps them actually put faces to the people, like they're real live people with concerns and different desires and, you know, conflicts and everything, and they actually remember the story, like the history better, and they connect with it more because of that. It talks about how it's great because then they get to see different people's points of view, and opens up their perspectives to seeing things in a different way, which makes them empathize with people that they normally wouldn't be able to, or don't think that they would be able to empathize with. I think about how I just read Assassins, and like I never really thought about it, but like in that play you don't like any of the characters, but you feel for them. So it's just interesting. And like, yeah, the statistics that they shared were really interesting. Like 81% of the students surveyed thought the live performance helped them retain information more efficiently than any other form, such as film or textbook. I think film is interesting because it's I am an advocate for film. That's like what I studied and I love it, but there is a removal there. And 88% thought they felt an emotional connection with the actors helped them focus and learn more. So it's just a really good article. And
it just does a good highlight. It does a good job of highlighting the importance of just the arts in general. You know, my experiences have been both in music and theater. So I was a music teacher in a public school system, and I just any sort of art form is what's going to keep students excited. Like whether it's film, you know, that's kind of what they always like. That's usually what is their form of leisure, what their form of fun is. So to, you know, for something to highlight the importance of theater as something more than just fun, the fact that you're enhancing learning and you're also enhancing, you know, emotional responsibility through the use of theater, I feel like it's so crucial, and it's something that you can't learn in just a regular classroom. You know, like I know I talk about them a lot, but it's because it's my, you know, firsthand experience, but like Hartford Stage has a great model, I feel like, in terms of their education program. I've worked with their education program for over 5 years at this point, and, you know, hearing from teaching artists just some of their activities or their exercises that they use in the classroom, you know, they get kids excited about reading books. So like they teach, I know one thing that they do is they'll come into a classroom for a week and they'll introduce the characters, like they'll act out the characters and they'll create tableaus that are directly from the book, and so the kids start learning about these characters before they even read the book. And so then by the end of the week, the students get a copy of the book that they've studied before reading it, and so then they're excited to read what actually happens. And it's just like a great way in which like you are expanding a student's what's the word? Just openness, or like, you know, just willingness to, just a newer way for them to kind of approach. But it's just like, it's something that I feel like as artists we need to take into consideration as we move forward as well, you know, for any of us that are looking to become educators, to just kind of like how we can start instilling that at a very young age. So
this also ties into another article that was on the green page of that it's by CMU, by Peggy Legally. Talks about teacher helps student heal through theater arts. And this talks about a teacher who is Melody Hartsfield, who was involved with the Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida shooting. And she helped hide 65 of her students in the classroom. And she talks about how, where is it? She says, I saw through them that the theater education changes lives. When everything that was happening in the school, such a negative light was shown upon the students because of the former student, it becomes someone said, wait, are kids speaking up because they learned how to do that in their theater class, where they were given permissions to themselves to feel stronger about what they believe. And talking about how that theater is that thing that helped them connect and helped them find their sense of community and come back from that tragedy. And like just another way that theater and the arts are good.
I mean, I feel like
good should not be taken away.
With the current like political climate and social climate, I feel like it's gonna be a time for the arts to kind of step forward and kind of create a process of healing after. And I feel like even based on the previous article that we just talked about in terms of the breakup of how, where our issues lie in theater, I feel like it's going to become even more crucial as we approach the next couple of years, where we are creating an environment and a world where we can re-educate people on how to be good human beings as opposed to just citizens. Like I feel like right now we've all going through a phase where we're creating a lot of just very specific mind processes and how people approach certain social situations, and I feel like the art has the opportunity, or the arts and theater specifically have the opportunity to re-educate people to touch base with their emotions and how to actually handle their emotions. So yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's been another wonderful week. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.